Catch Me If You Can is a 2002 American biographical crime comedy drama film based on the life of Frank Abagnale, who, before his 19th birthday, successfully performed cons worth millions of dollars by posing as a Pan American World Airways pilot, a Georgia doctor, and a Louisiana parish prosecutor. His primary crime was check fraud. He became so skillful that the FBI eventually turned to him for help in catching other check forgers. The film was directed by Steven Spielberg and stars Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks, with Christopher Walken, Amy Adams, Martin Sheen, and Nathalie Baye in supporting roles. Development for the film started in 1980 but did not progress until 1997 when the film rights to Abagnale's book were purchased by Spielberg's DreamWorks. David Fincher, Gore Verbinski, Lasse Hallström, Paragraph M, Miloš Forman and Cameron Crowe had all been possible candidates for director before Spielberg decided to direct. Filming took place from February to May 2002. The film was a financial and critical success, and the real Abagnale reacted positively to it. Plot: in 1963, teenage Frank Abagnale lives in New Rochelle, New York with his father Frank Abagnale, Sr., and French mother Paula. When Frank Sr. is denied a business loan at Chase Manhattan Bank due to unspecified difficulties with the IRS, the family is forced to move from their large home to a small apartment. Paula carries on an affair with Jack, a friend of her husband. Meanwhile, Frank poses as a substitute teacher in his French class. Frank's parents file for divorce, and Frank runs away. When he runs out of money, he begins to rely on confident scams to get by. Soon, Frank's cons grow bolder and he even impersonates an airline pilot. He forges Pan Am payroll checks and succeeds in stealing over $2.8 million. Meanwhile, Carl Hanratty, an FBI bank fraud agent, begins to track down Frank. Carl and Frank meet in a hotel, where Frank convinces Carl his name is Barry Allen of the Secret Service. Frank leaves, Carl angrily realizing his mistake just as it is too late. Later, at Christmas, Carl is still working when Frank calls him, attempting to apologize for duping Carl. Carl rejects his apology and tells him he will soon be caught, but laughs when he realizes Frank actually called him because he has no one else to talk to. Frank hangs up, and Carl continues to investigate, suddenly realizing that the name Barry Allen is from the Flash comic books and that Frank is just a teenager. Frank, meanwhile, has expanded his con to include the identities of doctor and lawyer, but has fallen in love with Brenda, to whom he eventually admits the truth about himself and asks her to run away with him. Carl tracks him to his engagement party where Frank has left Brenda, asking her to meet him 2 days later so they can elope. Frank sees her waiting for him 2 days later, but also notices plainclothes agents waiting to arrest him. He realizes he has been set up and escapes on a flight to Europe. 7 months later, Carl shows his boss that Frank has been forging checks all over Western Europe and asks permission to go to Europe to look for him. When his boss declines, Carl brings Frank's checks to printing professionals who deem that the checks were printed in France. Carl remembers from an interview with Frank's mother that she was born in Montrichard, France. He goes there and finds Frank, and tells him that the French police will kill him if he does not go with Carl quietly. Frank assumes he is lying at first, but Carl promises Frank he would never lie to him, and Carl takes him outside, where the French police escort him to prison. The scene then flashes forward to a plane returning Frank home from prison, where Carl informs him that his father has died. Consumed with grief, Frank escapes from the plane and goes back to his old house, where he finds his mother with the man she left his father for, as well as a girl who Frank realizes is his half-sister. Frank gives himself up and is sentenced to 12 years in prison, getting visits from time to time from Carl. When Frank points out how one of the checks Carl is carrying as evidence is fake, Carl convinces the FBI to offer Frank a deal by which he can live out the remainder of his sentence working for the bank fraud department of the FBI, which Frank accepts. While working at the FBI, Frank misses the thrill of the chase and even attempts to fly as an airline pilot again. He is cornered by Carl, who insists that Frank will return to the FBI job since no one is chasing him. On the following Monday, Carl is nervous that Frank has not yet appeared at work. However, Frank does show up and they discuss their next case. The ending credits reveal that Frank has been happily married for 26 years, has 3 sons, lives in the Midwest, is still good friends with Carl, has caught some of the world's most elusive money forgers, and earns millions of dollars each year because of his work creating unforgeable checks. Cast: Leonardo DiCaprio as Frank Abagnale, Jr. Before his 19th birthday, Frank successfully conned millions of dollars worth of checks as a Pan Am pilot, doctor, and Louisiana parish prosecutor. Tom Hanks as Carl Hanratty, an FBI agent who pursues Frank for most of the film. Hanratty is often mocked by other agents who do not take check fraud seriously. Hanratty is divorced, and his daughter and ex-wife live in Chicago. In the end, Carl and Frank become great friends. Christopher Walken as Frank Abagnale, Sr., Frank's father, and a World War II veteran. Frank loses his wife Paula and most of his wealth after he committed tax evasion. Frank dies after falling down a staircase in a train station. Nathalie Baye is Paula Abagnale. Frank meets her when she is 18 years old in Montrichet, France during World War II. 5 weeks later the couple marries. They divorce when Frank is 16, leaving Paula to marry Jack Barnes, with whom she has a daughter. Amy Adams as Brenda Strong. Before becoming a nurse, Brenda had an abortion. Her strict Lutheran parents disown her, until they meet Frank, Jr. Martin Sheen as Roger Strong, Brenda's father, and Carol's husband. Roger is a well-recognized district attorney in Louisiana and is not easily convinced that Frank, Jr. graduated from law school. James Brolin is Jack Barnes, an associate of Frank, at the New Rochelle, New York Rotary Club. Barnes later carries on an affair with Paula, leading to the divorce of Frank Jr.'s parents. Nancy Lanian as Carol Strong, Brenda's mother and Roger's wife. When thinking that Frank, Jr. is a doctor, lawyer and Lutheran, she is highly ecstatic for her daughter's marriage. Brian Howe, Frank John Hughes and Chris Ellis portray FBI agents. Jennifer Garner cameos as a call girl, and Ellen Pompeo and Elizabeth Banks have small roles. The real Frank Abagnale appears as a French policeman arresting his character. Production: Frank Abagnale sold the film rights to his autobiography in 1980. Executive producer Michelle Sheen purchased the film rights in 1990, for Paramount Pictures. By December 1997, Barry Kemp purchased the film rights from Sheen, bringing the project to DreamWorks, with Jeff Nathanson writing the script. By April 2000, David Fincher was attached to direct over the course of a few months, but dropped out in favor of Panic Room. In July 2000, Leonardo DiCaprio had entered discussions to star, with Gore Verbinski to direct. Steven Spielberg signed on as producer, and filming was set to begin in March 2001. Verbinski cast James Gandolfini as Carl Hanratty, Ed Harris as Frank Abagnale, Sr., and Chloe Sevigny as Brenda Strong. Verbinski dropped out because of DiCaprio's commitment on Gangs of New York. Lasse Hallström Paragraph M was in negotiations to direct by May 2001, but dropped out in July 2001. At this stage Harris and Sevigny left the film, but Gandolfini was still attached. Spielberg, co-founder of DreamWorks, offered the job of director to Miloš Forman, and considered hiring Cameron Crowe. During this negotiation period, Spielberg began to consider directing the film himself, eventually dropping projects such as Big Fish and Memoirs of a Geisha. Spielberg officially committed to directing in August 2001. The search for Brenda Strong's portrayal lasted months, but Amy Adams was ultimately chosen. Spielberg loved her tape, and producer Walter F. Parks commented that she was as fresh and honest as anyone we'd seen, which was an important element in the role. Christopher Walken was cast as Frank Abagnale, Sr. following Parks' suggestion. Martin Sheen played Roger Strong as he had intimidating presence. Spielberg wanted a French actress to portray Paul Abagnale to stay true to the facts. He asked for Brian De Palma's help, who was living in Paris, and he did tests with several actresses such as Nathalie Baye. Spielberg had seen Jennifer Garner on Alias and wanted her to play a small role in the film due to her busy schedule. The original start date was January 2002, but was pushed to February 7 in Los Angeles, California. Other locations included Burbank, Downey, New York, Louisiana, Ontario International Airport, Quebec City and Montreal. The film was shot in 147 different locations in only 52 days. DiCaprio reflected, "Scenes that we thought would take 3 days took an afternoon." Filming ran from April 25 to Euro 30 in Park Avenue, just outside the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. Production moved to Orange, New Jersey and returned to Brooklyn for bank and courthouse scenes. Shooting also took place at the TWA Flight Center at John F. Kennedy International Airport. Quebec City was chosen for its European character and French feel. Place Royale, within Old Quebec, stands for Montrich. The church in the background of the arrest scene is Notre Dame des Victoires. Filming ended on May 12 in Montreal. Soundtrack. A film's soundtrack was released on December 10, 2002 by DreamWorks Records. The original score was composed by John Williams. Fictions. Despite the various changes from real-life events, Abagnale believed Spielberg was the only filmmaker who could do this film justice. However, Abagnale had little involvement with the film. In November 2001, he had never met nor spoken to Steven Spielberg and "I have not read the script. I prefer not to. I understand that they now portray my father in a better light, as he really was." Steven Spielberg has told the screenplay writer that he wants complete accuracy in the relationships and actual scams that I perpetrated, Abagnale reported. "I hope in the end the movie will be entertaining, exciting, funny and bring home an important message about family, childhood and divorce." Abagnale never saw his father after he ran away from home. Spielberg wanted to continue to have that connection where Frank kept trying to please his father. By making him proud of him. By seeing him in the uniform, the Pan American uniform. However, Abagnale praised the idea. "Even though I didn't see my dad again, every night after living a brilliant day and meeting many women, and making much money, I'd come back alone to a hotel room and I would just think of my mum and dad and fantasize about getting them back together again, and cry. It's the justification of a fantasy." Carl Hanratty is based on FBI agent Joe Shear. In the shooting script the character was referred to as Joe Shear, but was changed to Carl Hanratty for unknown reasons. Themes. Catch Me If You Can deals with themes of broken homes and troubled childhoods. Spielberg's parents divorced when he was a teenager, similar to Frank Abagnale's situation. In the film, Carl Hanratty is also divorced from his wife, who lives with their daughter in Chicago. "Some of my films have had to do with broken homes and people on the run from their sad pasts," Spielberg stated. "But there are those strands that got me to say, you know, there's something also about me that I can say through the telling of this kind of light-hearted story." Spielberg also wanted to create a film that sympathized with a crook. He explained, "Frank was a 21st-century genius working within the innocence of the mid-60s, when people were more trusting than they are now. I don't think this is the kind of movie where somebody could say, I have a career plan." Release. Game Show Network aired the 1977 episode of the television game show To Tell the Truth that featured Frank Abagnale. Segments were shown on December 29, 2002 and January 1, 2003 as promotion. The marketing department was careful to market the film as inspired by a true story in order to avoid controversy similar to that surrounding A Beautiful Mind and The Hurricane, both of which deviated from history. The premiere took place at Westwood, Los Angeles, California on December 18, 2002. Reception. Catch Me If You Can was released on December 25, 2002, earning slightly above $30 million in 3,225 theaters during its opening weekend. The film went on to gross $164.6 million in North America and $187.5 million in foreign countries, coming at a worldwide total of $352.1 million. The film was a financial success, recouping the $52 million budget 6 times over. Catch Me If You Can was the 11th highest-grossing film of 2002. Minority Report was 10th highest. Based on 186 reviews collected by Rotten Tomatoes, 96% of reviews were positive. Metacritic collected an average score of 76, based on 38 reviews. Roger Ebert heavily praised DiCaprio's performance, and concluded this is not a major Spielberg film, although it is an effortlessly watchable one. Mick Larsol said it was not Spielberg's best movie, but one of his smoothest and maybe his friendliest. The colorful cinematography, smart performances and brisk tempos suggest a filmmaker subordinating every other impulse to the task of manufacturing pleasure. Stephen Hunter believed DiCaprio showed the range and ease and cleverness that Martin Scorsese so underutilized in Gangs of New York. James Berardinelli observed, "Catch Me If You Can never takes itself or its subjects too seriously, and contains more genuinely funny material than about 90% of the so-called comedies found in multiplexes these days." In addition, Berardinelli praised John Williams' film score, which he felt was more intimate and jazzy than his usual material, evoking Henry Mancini. Peter Travers was one of few who gave the film a negative review. Travers considered Catch Me If You Can to be bogged down over 140 minutes. "A film that took off like a hare on speed ends like a winded tortoise." At the 75th Academy Awards, Christopher Walken and John Williams were nominated for Best Supporting Actor and Original Music Score. Walken won the same category at the 56th British Academy Film Awards, while Williams, costume designer Mary Zophres and screenwriter Jeff Nathanson received nominations. DiCaprio was nominated for the Golden Globe Award for Best Actor, Motion Picture Drama. Williams also earned a Grammy Award nomination. Elements of the film were later parodied in The Simpsons episode Catch 'Em If You Can. Home media: Catch Me If You Can was released on DVD on May 6, 2003 and on Blu-ray on December 4, 2012. Musical adaptation. A musical adaptation of the same name premiered at the Fifth Avenue Theatre in Seattle, Washington in July 2009, starring Aaron Tveit and Norbert Leo Butz. It began previews on Broadway at the Neil Simon Theatre on March 11, 2011 and officially opened April 10, 2011. The musical was nominated for 4 Tony Awards, including Best Musical. See also, The Great Imposter, a 1961 movie based on the story of an imposter named Ferdinand Waldo de Mera. The Pretender, a TV series. References. Further reading: Frank Abagnale, Jr. and Stan Redding. Catch Me If You Can, The Amazing True Story of the Youngest and Most Daring Con Man in the History of Fun and Profit. External links: Official website, Catch Me If You Can at the Internet Movie Database, Catch Me If You Can at AllMovie, Catch Me If You Can at Rotten Tomatoes, Catch Me If You Can at Box Office Mojo, an interview with Leonardo DiCaprio, Movies feature at IGN, official website for Catch Me If You Can the musical.